All right, good morning and welcome to our love and marriage presentation today. And we are going to again have Terri Meeks as our presenter. And so I know a lot of you have joined our programs before, so you kind of already know all this I'm going to tell, but just for anyone who is new, who might be joining us, Terri has been doing genealogy since 2000. So she is very knowledgeable, and we do welcome questions at the end. And also, we welcome questions in the middle if you missed something and want something repeated. We don't know how it is on your end, so we know it works on our end, but if you missed something or need something repeated, let us know. As well as if you want to see any of this content again, we tend to put all of our programs onto YouTube after we do the class. So you can always check on YouTube if you would like to see it again later. Usually takes a couple days to get it up, but then if you want to see it again or share it with anybody, you can. So like I said, Terri's been doing this since 2000, and she's been a volunteer with the museum since 2018. And so we really appreciate all she does for us, and she knows a lot about all this. So I hope everyone enjoys learning about marriage licenses and all those related documents today. We will be using the chat. So if you do have any questions, please put it in the chat. If you would like to right now, kind of just send a hello or sound off so I know that the chat is working, that would be great. If you are having issues with the chat, you are also welcome to send me an email at mkeaton@canyoncity.org. I will also keep an eye on that as well. So if you have any questions and you're having issues with the chat, and I will type that into the chat for you. Otherwise, we are going to get started, and I hope everyone enjoys the program.
Good morning, everyone, and I hope you're sitting in front of a fireplace or wrapped in a warm Afghan this morning, as it's pretty cold out there. So we're going to talk this morning about marriage and the many records that might be associated with marriages. One of the caveats I will put on is we are not going to talk about common law marriages. And since we have Valentine's Day, we're not going to talk about divorces either. So let's just jump right in. Marriage is a legal contract between two people. And because it is a legal contract, it is one of the most reliable genealogy documents that you might find. They are registered for the most part in courthouses at the county level, but may be passed on to the state agencies. If people were married in a particular area, you want to look at the county courthouse, and you want to pay close attention to the date when the county was formed. In the 1700s and early 1800s, many of the counties divided and subdivided. So it's important, if you have a marriage record from the late 1700s, to look in the appropriate county at that particular date. If you're concerned about where the county was and when it divided, just put in the county and the state name and do a simple search on your whatever search engine you use. And Wikipedia has done a wonderful job talking about the formation of counties and what the neighboring counties are. For the most part, people got married near the bride's hometown in the bride's county. But that is not always 100% the rule. So look in neighboring counties if you can't find a marriage. And you might also look in where the husband might have been from. I volunteered with a lady at a family history center, and her parents both were born and raised in a small town in upstate New York. And when she went looking for their marriage record, she discovered that it was in New Mexico. And it turned out that her parents were married during World War II. And her father was stationed there for training prior to going off to the war. So at least she had some people that she had her mother who was still alive, and she could talk to her and find out. Don't look in New York for that marriage certificate. So Some of the records may only be found among church records, but also one of the reasons that these are reliable records is, for the most part, the two people that are involved in the marriage are the ones that are presenting the information. They are going to the courthouse in person to apply so that the information is more reliable, for example, than birth or death certificates. Where can you find some of these? For the most part, Ancestry and Family Search are our two main sources for this information. They have both done a wonderful job in either copying, digitizing actual marriage records and courthouse records, or they have extracted the information from courthouses and are presenting that information. For the most part, we see marriage licenses, or you might see a marriage register. And we are going to look at, did you realize that there are 9 different kinds of marriage records? So we're going to be taking a look at some of the other records that might exist. These other records, for the most part, are actually found in county courthouses or at state archives. Courthouses have existed for many, many decades, a couple of centuries in this country. And for that reason, there's a lot of paperwork. So the county may have actually destroyed some of the records and transcribed the information into a marriage register, in which case that's the only information you are going to find. But other courthouses actually forwarded some of the information to the state archives. So if in the near future or the distant future, you're planning a genealogy trip to a place where your ancestors might live, take the time to visit a county courthouse, or if convenient, a state archives, because you might find additional documents with additional information that is not available on the actual transcribed record or the copied record that you find online. Libraries are also a valuable resource for marriage records. If you remember back in the day, newspapers on Sunday would have society columns, and they would publish pictures of the bride along with a full account of the marriages that took place on the preceding Saturday. You could also find information about engagements, or if couples were celebrating a significant anniversary, the 25th or the 50th anniversary, you might find information about a marriage there. County histories are also a valuable resource. They recount some of the stories of the first people that might have settled in the county, or prominent people that settled in the county, and they might include information about the marriage date and births of children. Genealogy Society publications are another valuable source of marriage records. Many genealogy societies have gone to county courthouses and gone through the marriage books, the marriage registers, and extracted the information on the names of the couple and the actual marriage date. So you might be able to find something in one of their publications. They also accept Bible records. They don't even have to be from the particular area that they are serving. If you have a family Bible, if you contact a local genealogy society, they are always willing to take the information, births, marriages, and deaths that might be recorded in the family Bible. So here are the kinds of records that you might be able to find in one of those courthouse or state archives packets. And we are going to look at each one of these and look at the information that might or might not be provided on each of these applications, certificates, or bonds, etc. As I said before, because of space in courthouse, not all of them still exist. Marriage intentions. For the most part, these were, especially in colonial times, recorded in the town meeting books. And they usually are published for about 3 weeks prior to the marriage. They are very, very similar to the church records in the Catholic Church, the banns, and also in the Quaker Church, where on 3 consecutive Sundays, they might have announced the intention of a couple to marry. Some of these might also be recorded. The announcement was actually made at a town hall meeting or in a church service, but they might have also been posted on a door for people in the town to express any objections to the marriage. And that now has been translated into part of our marriage ceremony. If there is anyone here who knows of any reason why this couple should not be joined, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. That was the intention of marriage intention, to discover any reasons why the marriage should not take place. Here's an 1809 intention. It's a printed form, and this one happens to be from Boston for a Mr. Levi Washburn, and he intends to marry Anna Nicholson. Simple and straightforward. And in the text, we see that it's going to be announced on 3 public meetings within the said town as the law directs. So for 3 consecutive weeks, they are going to announce the intention of this young couple, I don't know whether they're young or old, to marry. A little bit later in 1846, we see a New Hampshire record, very simple, straightforward, where Mr. Samuel Philbrook is going to hopefully marry Miss Lydia Moulton, and where each one of them is from. We have to note also that with the marriage intention, we don't know whether the marriage actually took place or not. So it's important to realize that in most cases it did, but there may be the instance where it did not. In doing the research for this presentation, I was very surprised to discover that in Massachusetts today, the 21st century, people planning to get married are required to file a marriage intention prior to the marriage license being issued. So you might see an announcement in a newspaper that says a couple has the intention of getting married. And here we see there are 3 separate announcements where the person works, where they live, and the potential bride's name, where she works, and where she lives. And we have 3 of these that talk about either where they work, what their occupations were, and where they are living at the time. It's very interesting. I said this form is still used today. They must file the intention to marry. And they're in Massachusetts, there is a 3-day wait period before they can actually pick up the license. The license is good for 60 days. And if the marriage doesn't take place within those 60 days, you have to file another intention and request for a license. Maine also uses an intention to marry application form. It's interesting to note that marriage intentions do not exist for couples who marry by bands, excuse me. You're going to find one or the other. Either a marriage intention might have been filed or bans were published for the 3 consecutive weeks. In Massachusetts, there is the ability to have a marriage without delay. So it does exist. Next, we have marriage bonds. This was the case where money was actually put down to guarantee that there were no impediments to the intended marriage. And in this case, you get the name of the bride and the groom, the date that the bond was actually issued, and the name of the bondsman or the person who is going to ensure that the money is going to be paid. In many cases, it is a father, a brother, a relative, and it may even be a friend who is putting up the bond money. If either one of the party declines to go through with the marriage, the bond is forfeited. And interestingly enough, the bond is forfeited to the state, not to the injured potential spouse. It goes to the state. And these records are, for the most part, common in the South and the Mid-Atlantic states. They started in the early 1800s and lasted well into the middle of the 1800s. And we'll see some of these records and look at the amount of money that is pledged. In a lot of cases, one of the articles that I read had a little bit of humor in it. They said that this was a guarantee to make sure that the man showed up for the wedding. The bonds are usually dated a few days prior to the actual ceremony, but in the research that I've done, virtually all of the bonds that I have found have been on the exact same day as the marriage. So, and as I mentioned, the money that is posted, similar to the bail bonds that we have in existence today, is but a portion of the stated amount. In some cases, it depended if a prominent citizen or if a citizen of good reputation might have been the bondsman or the surety on it. They might have just relied on the good name of that person rather than the exchange of money. The types of impediments that might have existed might be that one or the other of the spouses was still married to someone else. And one of the exemptions to the forfeiture of the bond is if one of the party actually died before the marriage could actually take place. The bond was then canceled. It was not forfeited. Here's a bond from 1867 from North Carolina. And we see that Alex Petit and his surety is Ransom Petit. And with the same name, we can infer that we know that it's a relative. It may be a father or a brother. And additional information, for example, a census might help us to confirm what that relationship is. And the surprising thing, this is 1867, and we're looking at a $1,000 bond. Now, I realize that only a portion of that money would be put up, but that is still a significant amount of money in 1867. And Alex is intending to marry Mary Morgan. And we note down at the bottom that there are the signatures of Alex and Ransom. An important note is we see these plus signs along with the notation, his mark. In that case, it means that Alex and indeed Ransom were not able to read or write. And so they made a mark in order to indicate their approval on that. And you also have a witness to their signatures. I have run across, for the most part, most of the information with the marks are plus signs or X's, but some people actually had unique marks that they might make to separate themselves from other people. So look for that information as well as signatures from your actual relatives. Here is a marriage bond from Alabama in about the same time frame. We're looking at 1872. And we have H.S. Gilmore and his bondsman, David Pate. They have different names, so we don't know whether they are relative or simply a friend. The good news in this particular case is the bond is only a $200 bond. So it's interesting to see how the two different states approach this in terms of a monetary value. And it gives us the information that H.S. Gilmore and Nancy Bunkley are intended to marry. And both the groom and his surety have signed. In this case, we don't see the indication of his mark. So we know that the actual signatures belong to the two gentlemen involved. Another one from those mid-Atlantic states or the South. This one is from Tennessee. And it's a simple statement that William Gordon, his surety John Bridges, and William is intending to marry Ella Bolton. And here again, this is from 1885, but it's requiring $1,250 bond in this particular case. And we see their signatures. So simple, straightforward information, but and not that much, but you may get other relatives that might help you find your people in a particular area at a particular time. It is also interesting to note, here again, the marriage bond is not proof that the actual marriage did take place. And if it did not take place and there were no extenuating circumstances, the full value of the bond was paid to the state. We have marriage applications. These are required in some of the jurisdictions before the marriage license actually is issued. And some of these are still in effect today. This is where sometimes you get more genealogical information provided around the marriage. And we're going to look at some to see the information that might be provided. In some cases, the applications may be kept in a separate file, a separate book, or they may be found attached to the marriage license. In a lot of the cases that we're going to look at it in the next couple of minutes, we're going to see that it's actually a single form that combines multiples of these marriage records. You might see the application, the actual license, as well as a certificate. And you need to make sure that all parts are completely filled out to ensure that the marriage actually did take place. I realize this is probably very small, but we'll go over some of the information. This is one of those ones where the application, we've got the cart before the horse. In the center section here, it says this is a certificate to obtain a marriage license, and yet the whole form is the marriage license. So this part would be completed prior to the issuing of the license. So we'll take a look at this. We have a Matthew Smith who is planning to, oh, excuse me. This is even smaller than I thought. We have a Matthew Scott, excuse me, and Annabelle Emmons, who are planning to marry. Talks about where they are each from currently residing and how old they are, where they were actually born. And we noticed that Annabelle, this is from West Virginia, but Annabelle was actually born in Virginia. The interesting thing is that Richard Emmons, who is probably her father, is actually providing this information to the court. After that information is completed, then a marriage license is issued, which allows anyone who is authorized to perform a marriage ceremony, it gives them permission to do so. The final part of the form is the actual minister's statement that the marriage took place. And we see that on the 1st of May, that the minister actually did unite these people in marriage. This is another one also where we have 1 days. We've got the 30th of April, and the marriage actually took place on the 1st of May. So a very short time frame between the various forms. Here's another marriage application. This one is Mr. Charles Smith and Ella Yeckley, and it gives their ages. And we have some additional information. We have Charles's parents, or excuse me, this is where they were from, but we have Charles's parents, James and Mary. Unfortunately, it does not give the mother's maiden name. So this is just one step better than John and Mary Smith. We have James, and we have the bride's parents as well, Christian and Catherine Yeckley, no maiden names. We have their race and what he did for his occupation, and she would just be a housewife at this particular point in time, and where each one of them were born. The application is filed, and we have the 19th of September in 1898, and we have her signature, but here again, we have his mark. This is part of the same form. At the bottom of the form, and this one is in the correct order, we have the license that is issued to a minister of the gospel or a justice of the peace to go ahead and actually perform the marriage ceremony. And we see a certificate at the bottom that shows that on the 20th of September in Neway, Pennsylvania, Charles and Ella were actually joined in matrimony. This is another case of where a single day elapsed. The application and the license were issued on the 19th. The marriage took place on the 20th. And by the 25th, it was recorded at the county level. This one is just the simple application. There are no further attachments, but we are just talking about Richard Loving, and he's planning to marry Mildred Jeter. And it indicates this is a mixed race. In this particular case, I believe it's from Washington, D.C., and I believe this might have been the case that went to the Supreme Court, in that Mildred was actually a Black woman. So this one was a controversial one at the time. Marriage licenses. These are one of the documents that still exist today. And it goes, it's from the county, as we've said, authorizing the actual performance of the marriage. It is one of the most common forms that we do find today. However, it also does not indicate that the marriage actually took place. You need to have that completion at the bottom of the license or on the back side of the license. But if you find only a license and not the following forms, and your couple is found in the census for many, many decades with children, you can assume that the marriage did go forward and that the minister or the justice of the peace just failed to turn in the forms. Here again, like all of the preceding documents, the purpose is to ensure that the marriage conforms to all legal requirements. And as we've said, it grants permission to anyone who is authorized to celebrate marriage ceremonies. He can actually go forward and perform them. If you remember the marriage bond that we saw a couple of minutes ago, here is the marriage license for H.S. Gilmore and Nancy Bunkley. The first part was the bond where he was going to put up $200. And by coincidence, on the 24th of October in 1872, the actual license is issued. In this corner right here, this is the actual certification that in Wetumpka, Alabama, on the same day that the marriage was actually performed by Mr. Milner. You'll notice that we have here M.G. He's a minister of the gospel, and you will find this notation on many, many of the 19th century records especially. You'll also notice that the forms are filed with the judge of probate. At the county level today, marriage records are all contained in a separate or a single office, and it's just in one place that you have to look for them. But the forms may have, depending on the locality, may have been issued by different judges from different courts. Here is another marriage license. The top of the form, this is one that happens to be from Virginia, just simply states that to any person licensed to celebrate marriage, and we're going to get Frank Wright and Edna Krickenberger married in Stanton, Virginia. And we actually see the certificate at the bottom, which does prove that the marriage actually took place in 1910 in Stanton. And we see also that in this particular case, we have the family members. We have William Wright's father and his mother, and we get her maiden name on the actual certificate. And we get Edna's father, P.M. Krickenberger, and her mother, Lottie Shefflet. So we do get the maiden names of the mother and hopefully provide additional information for you to go digging in your family records. This one is kind of flowery. The writing is very pretty, but we have the top part. This one is from Texas, and it's a greeting that the license is going to allow these two, William and Henrietta, to marry. And at the bottom, we have the certification that the marriage actually did take place in December of 1859. And once again, we have the license and the actual marriage occurring on the same day. George Martin is certifying it, and in this particular case, we see JP. He is a justice of the peace. So it kind of tells you where the marriage might have taken place. In many cases, if it was a minister of the gospel, it might have been in a church or in the residence of one of the family members. So information for additional digging. Marriage consents. These are for minor children wishing to get married and are still in effect today. If a minor child wishes to marry, they need the consent of one of their parents or their guardian to do so. This can be useful in identifying the father of either the bride or the groom if they're underage, or indeed also the mother. It also indicates an approximate age of the minor. You need to look at the particular locality, consider the time period, and whether it's a male or a female that is the minor, because the legal ages were different at various times. In many cases, for the woman, it might have been as young as 14 years of age. I know in my particular family, I have ancestry in Quebec, Canada, and a person could be contracted for marriage as young, a lady as young as 12, and the marriage actually could not take place until she had turned 14. So it's important to realize that different states had different legal requirements for marriage age, as well as over different decades and centuries. Here is a simple, early handwritten marriage consent in March of 1818. And we see that Mr. Nicholson is giving permission for his daughter, Mary Nicholson, to be joined in marriage to Daniel Clark in Warren County. And we see Thomas Nicholson's signature. Thomas is Mary's father, my daughter. We also notice that the signature is verified and witnessed by two other people. One of them, Richard Clark, who might have been Daniel's father or a brother or an uncle, and a William Nicholson. So one party from each side of the marriage. And here again, we don't know whether William might be a brother or an uncle. We do know that her father was Thomas. And here again, we notice the his mark forms. This one comes a little bit later. This one is in 1903. And in this particular case, it is a mother, Mary Elliott, who is giving her permission for her 17-year-old daughter, Lily, to marry George Pettit. Her signature is also witnessed. And once again, we see that this is issued in a probate court. This one happens to be interesting. I'm not exactly sure. There is a question mark whether this is from Louisiana, but this is a case of enslaved persons. My servant, Gilbert Jones, has my consent to be married to Ellen Anderson, the servant of Mrs. Lucy Turner. And it is signed Alexandria. Now, I don't know whether that's Virginia or Louisiana, but in 1851. And Mr. Dixon is actually giving the permission. And likewise, Ms. Turner is also giving her permission for her servant to be married, her servant Nellie to be married to Gilbert Jones. So if you happen to be of African American descent, this might be valuable information to find where Nellie was living, where Gilbert was living at the time. Marriage consents also do not prove the marriage actually took place. A very, very unusual form, but some of them do exist, is a marriage contract. And these are similar to what we consider today to be prenuptial contracts, prenuptial agreements. Some of these were recorded beginning as early as colonial times. And in most cases, they involved the fact that a woman was bringing property of some sort to her marriage. She might have had real estate, land property, or she might have had personal property. If she was previously widowed and coming to the marriage with a house and a carriage or a horse, as well as land, she might have engaged in a marriage contract to protect her interests and perhaps those of any children that she might have had from the first marriage. These are usually recorded with marriage records, or you might also find them in land records with deed books, and extremely rarely in a will record or a probate record. To be perfectly honest with you, I was not able to find any marriage contracts within the United States from either the early or current times. However, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, my family on my mother's side was from Quebec, Canada, and they used contracts of all kinds extensively. They did have marriage contracts, especially in the 16 and 1700s. And they do identify the person's name, Monsieur Dion. He is the widow of someone named Moreau, and he is marrying the person. It also gives the names of the parents. I realize this is virtually illegible to you, but it does give the names and the maiden names of the mothers. In Canada, women never change their names, so it's a wonderful practice. And it goes on. These contracts are usually 2 to maybe 6 or 7 pages in length, and they tell what each person is bringing to the marriage, what the husband is bringing in terms of land or farm implements, etc., and what the woman is bringing to the marriage. Tablecloths, bed linens. One of the interesting things in the 1600s in Quebec was the number of sewing needles that a woman was bringing to her marriage. Apparently, it was something that had to be imported. They didn't make them in Quebec, so it was a valuable item to be counted. Finally, we're going to get to some of those that actually do prove that the marriage took place. We have seen some forms where you have the application, you have the license, and at the bottom, you have the actual return where the officiator of the marriage signs that he certifies that he has actually married the couple. And this information is returned to the county and may eventually be forwarded on to the state. As we've seen, it may be a completely separate form, but in many cases, it's on either the bottom or the back of the marriage license. In some cases, the return is never made. People in their excitement after the marriage actually occurs, they have usually a celebration of some sort, a reception or a dinner, and sometimes the marriage license just gets put in a pocket or taken home, and the return is never made and recorded. In most cases, they do include the names of the bride and groom, the date and place of the marriage, and the officiator's signature, and as we've seen, their title. This is one of my favorite marriage records. It is a marriage return, and it's a completely separate form from the license and any applications. And we have Mr. Ramsey, who is marrying Ms. McKinney, and we have where they are from. This is a relatively late one. It's 1934, but we have complete information as to their race, where they're living, what their status was. He's a bachelor, she's a spinster. Spinster does not have a negative connotation. It just means that she has never been married before. It is their first marriage for each one of them, where they were actually born, both of them in Washington State. And it gives their parents' names and where they were born. This is wonderful. His father was born in Kansas, mother born in England. Her father was born in Kentucky, and her mother was born in Virginia. So this whole form just explodes when thinking about going back and doing census research. You've got all of these places within the states to look, as well as overseas. And we have the signature of the person who performed it, and he's writing his full title as Justice of the Peace. I apologize for the parallax in this. This is actually a microfilm, a copy of a record from a microfilm. It's from the state, actually New York City, and it does involve a couple of immigrants. And we have a Mr. Sosnitsky, where he's living, how old he is, what his occupation is, and where he is actually from. Russia, and it's written as Poland, but it's probably Poland. And here again, you have to think about, where did your people perhaps immigrate from, and have jurisdictions actually changed over the centuries? In this particular area, we see both Russia and Poland, and both of these countries divided, both of these countries took over different land. So it makes it hard to go backwards, and do some of the investigation. We have parents' names along with mother's maiden name. It's the first marriage for both of them. And we have his bride's name as well, and her parents, and the actual certification at the bottom that the marriage took place. So you can find these records even in large metropolitan areas from early on. This one, I think, was 1884. This is a marriage return, and here again, I apologize for the lack of clarity in it. But it's from 1892, and it's Nebraska, and it's a Robert McMurray, his age, and he is white. It's his first marriage, his parents, his residence, where he's from. He's a farmer, what his father's name was, and fortunately, it gives his mother's maiden name, and it gives the information about Delia. What made me smile is she's 18 years old, and reading down through her occupation, She's only 18 years old, but she's a lady of leisure, and it's even spelled wrong. But I had to laugh at that. But these do exist. It is a return, so the marriage actually took place. At the bottom is some instructions to the minister or the justice of the peace to thoroughly document what color the people are, whether they're white, black, Indian, Chinese, and some others. And if they're foreign born, to fully document where they were born, where they came from. So interesting what some of the instructions were, as well as the information that might have been provided. The marriage certificate. This is a state level document as opposed to a county level document, and they are still used today. They do prove, it's one of the 3 documents that prove that the marriage actually did take place. And unfortunately, some of these are very, very decorative, but they wind up, the originals wind up with the bride and groom. The information is turned over to the state, and they extract the information and they put it on either the bottom of the license, or they have a separate marriage register where the information is recorded. Here's a very plain Jane marriage certificate where we have Fletcher Whitmore, and he's going to marry Reba Clark in Indiana on the 27th of September in 1917, and the minister has signed it, and it has been filed with the clerk. Simple, straightforward, no frills. Here we have a little bit fancier document, and these are the kind that do wind up in the possession of the actual individuals. And this one is a very, very recent one of some very famous people. This one is from 1954, and it is Marilyn Monroe marrying Joe DiMaggio, and who their witnesses are, and the signature of the person who performed the marriage. And another one, not quite as fancy, but a justice of the peace marrying Elvis Presley and Priscilla Beaulieu in Reno, Nevada, Clark County, Nevada. So the certificates show that they actually did, the marriage actually did take place. Finally, we have the marriage register, the 3rd of the documents that prove that the marriage actually took place. And disappointingly, the marriage register frequently just simply records the names of the bride, the groom, and their date of marriage. And this is the case, especially in the older records, where looking for some of those initial documents might pay off and give you more information. As we discussed very, very early on, we said that county courthouses frequently ran out of space, and they needed to destroy or turn over the other documents to state archives. So licenses and sometimes returns have been either destroyed or placed elsewhere once they have been, the information has been recorded in the register. This is a marriage register from 1804 that simply states we have John, we have Samuel Waits marrying Elizabeth McIntosh and who actually performed the ceremony. On an even more frustrating level, I have seen these documents in the state of Texas, and rather than identifying Samuel, they'll just say S. Waits, E. McIntosh. So you really have no way to establish that indeed it is your people that are getting married. Here is another one, a simple register that recounts each one of the marriages as they have occurred in Tallapoosa County. This is another marriage record register from Salem, Massachusetts, and it is in the late 1890s, 1898, but it does give a lot of information, the date and place of the marriage, the names of the couple, where they are residing, what their ages are, what their occupations are, and the names of their parents, as well as what marriage it is. Is it their first, second, third marriage, and who actually is performing it? So with that, we've covered all of our marriage information that you might be able to find, and we'll open it up to any questions that you might have at this point.
So if you do have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, as well as we do have that Q&A section. I've seen that we did have a question there earlier. Since we did have Terry's image is very small, it's just so we can make sure that you're seeing the biggest picture of the slides as possible. So we do have a few minutes if you have any questions. Oh, we do have one that says, Terri, in the event of an elopement, would some of these documents have to be made out in the future just for the records?
No, they do not have to be made out. In most cases with an elopement, you're going to have just the simple, straightforward, either a marriage return or a simple marriage certificate. There has to be a certification that the marriage actually did take place.
And then with that, would there be a notice in the newspaper?
There could be. Here again, it depends on the time frame. If you're talking about something current, most of the newspapers have stopped publishing any kind of marriage information. With an elopement, it might be the case where are the people actually providing the information to a newspaper? So it would probably be the couple involved. And is anybody going to have a reception for them that might give further information? Some of these questions, especially about elopement, bring up current trends for destination weddings. And I didn't cover any of those because I'm thinking, we're looking backwards to our ancestors rather than to our current trends. But you might also take into account that there are different rules and different practices, so that destination weddings might, for future reference, provide challenges when trying to find this information. So if you have a friend, family, or relative that their marriage took place as a destination wedding, you might want to make sure that you get copies of all of the information that they currently have, because in the future, people might not think to look in Puerto Rico or in France or even Hawaii for a marriage record.
All right, so I think we have time for just this one last question. So if you can't find an actual marriage certificate, when do you give up and come to the conclusion they were not married?
Keep plugging. Here again, visiting county courthouses and state archives might hold the information that you may be looking for that is not online. Some people did engage in common law marriage. In other words, they lived together for a period of time, and depending on the state, that period of time, the length is defined differently, so that it may just be a common law marriage. In that case, you want to look at the census information. Are they coming to the census as a couple with children, etc., so that you can assume that they were married, whether legally or by common law, and estimate, the date of the marriage by the age of the oldest child. You might want to go back up, 18 months to 2 years.
All right. Well, we did have just a comment too, that sometimes it's good to look in neighboring states. Someone said my grandparents eloped to Illinois from Missouri, and that might be because their grandmother was only 16. So that is also a good thought to make sure you look around surrounding areas.
True. So we're also going to advertise. We've looked at love and marriage this month. So next month, we're going to go and look at birth records, because baby makes 3. So hopefully you can join us on Saturday, March 13th at 9 o'clock for another virtual genealogy session.
Yeah, so thank you everyone for joining us. I hope that you all learned some things and had a good time, and hopefully you're staying warm and you'll continue to stay warm, as tomorrow is just supposed to be just as cold. But I hope everyone had a good time. And like I said, we will post this on our YouTube in a few days. So just keep an eye out for that if you want to see it again. And I think that is all I kind of have to say. We'll have our presentation coming up, so keep an eye out for that, for when that goes up, that people can register. And if you do have any questions at a later date, feel free to send us an email at my email, mkeaton@canyoncity.org, or historycenter@canyoncity.org. Feel free to send us questions there if you think of something later, and I will forward them on to Terri. Thank you.